Golly. Chuck earlier said, and then you're going to listen to me talk. Chuck, they wouldn't listen to me when I was out there. How about you listen to me now?
That's not the way I remember it.
Okay, it is good to be with you folks. Good to be any place when you're 90 years old. I turned big 9-0 last Thursday, and I'm trying to catch up with Milt Chambers. I'm right behind you, Milt. See if I got my countdown here. You know, we have a rich history in this country. 400 years. 2007 we celebrated 200 years, which was represented the founding of Jamestown, which is I think recognized benchmark for American history. But so the 400 years of rich history, and we got about 60 years of that as space history. Some rich space history. I'm not sure how much rich space we're going to experience here in the near future, but we have enjoyed a good ride. Last time I made a little talk like this on the history of space, MC introduced me as working out at Kennedy Space Center for 40 years, and I really didn't know the guy, and I didn't know hardly anybody in the office, in the audience. But when I got up there to the podium like this, I said, I've never worked a day in my life at Kennedy Space Center. I kind of shocked him, and I knew I had to recover from that. And the way you do it, if you like what you're doing, it ain't work. And I think a lot of you never worked at Kennedy Space Center, right? Okay. I think the origin of our, can you hear me back there?
Yes.
Wayne, you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One time somebody said something, I can't hear you, and somebody else said, well, you ain't missing anything. But I think the origin of our rocket team that we started out with, it really goes back to the end of the war in Europe. You know, the V-2 rocket team, that World War II, we recognized a new dimension of warfare with the V-2. And this was headed up by a young scientist named Werner von Braun. And I have a real good book on Werner von Braun here. We're going to give it away. Chuck's going to do that, and we've got a special way we're going to derive it, but there's some good stories in there. And one, for example, von Braun had a good sense of humor. And some lady from Alabama, this before we went to the moon, she wrote him, one of these letters that I think a lot of them are circulating. If God wanted a man on the moon, he'd put him there. And she told him that and said, besides that, I'll bet you $1 you'll never make it. He wrote her back and said, this Bible didn't say anything about not having a man on the moon, but it did say something about gambling. There's some good material in there. One of the smartest decisions that we made in that period I'm talking about, the end of World War II, was the Project Paperclip. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. That was the project that was headed by General Toftoy, and they brought von Braun and about 120 of his guys to Fort Bliss, Texas, and of course von Braun had faked some papers, and he'd filled a train of car after car of V2s and hardware, anticipating he'd be in the American camp and not the Russians. And so that was a great decision. Bring those guys over here, put them at Fort Bliss, near White Sands Proving Ground. And then we followed that great decision, one of the dumbest things we've ever done. For 5 years, we didn't give them anything meaningful, no project. In fact, Frank Bryan later wrote, we wasted 5 years. They did fly some V2s. In fact, one of them went over El Paso and landed in a cemetery in Mexico. Well, you know, that period of 45 to 50, after World War II, our country was busy. You know, we wanted washing machines, cars, Jim Walter's homes, silk hose, all that kind of stuff. And that's good. And we deserved it, but we also had enough money to do a space program, but we completely neglected it. And over in the USSR, they took a different approach. They didn't go for any of that stuff, and I can verify it because we've been over there a couple of times, and they were living in that period like a third world country. I mean, third world. Of course, they had a tremendous space and military thing, but they got some of the Germans, that von Braun's team, and they put them to work. And that period that we were idle, they developed the second generation of the V2, and they were working on a rocket 500-mile range, which was way beyond anything we had at that time. So around 1950, the Korean War started, and our guys smartened up a little bit in Washington, you know, and said, hey, them Soviets, maybe they're up to something. So we better start looking at defending ourselves. So at that time, they moved von Braun and his team to Huntsville at Redstone Arsenal, and chartered to develop the Redstone rocket, which was a 150-mile plus range with carrying an atomic warhead. And Huntsville became a boom town. I mean, you know, many of you have been there when it was a little cotton town on the square, and it just exploded. And a lot of the influx in there were young engineers just out of school, most of them Auburn, like Dick Smith, and Alabama, Georgia Tech, Tennessee. I hope I'm not leaving out one of your good alma maters, but I'm sure they were represented. And so they went to work. And by summer of 1953, they had a rocket ready to come to Florida. So in the meantime, Dr. Kurt Davis, and he was one of von Braun's chief lieutenants, and Dr. Gruner, my mentor for many years, they were forming the missile firing lab, which was the guys that were going to come down later and launch the rocket. And so in August 20, 1953, we launched the first Redstone. A little bunker, much smaller, I mean, about as big as the corner of this room, over on the Cape. And it went out of sight in the clouds, and it went out of control. And we learned a tremendous lesson from that. I could go into that, but I don't think the time permits. And by the way, Chuck, if I start going too long, there was a safety issue here. I don't drive after dark. So 1953 to 1955, our little team would go back and forth. We would launch a rocket, back up our stuff. I'm talking about literally cleaning out the blockhouse, because we shared that little bunker with the Beaumont, which was a missile the Air Force was working on. So we'd go back to Huntsville, follow the rocket through the static test stand and through the quality checkout, and work with our design counterparts, and then we'd come back down and launch it. And after every launch, especially the Germans, they like to party. So we'd have a party here. There weren't many places here then to have a party. But then we'd go to Huntsville, and we get with our design counterparts up there, we'd have another party. And no matter which way the rocket went, we claimed a little partial success and celebrated. Now, Redstone 3 blew up right on the pad, right as we were getting the ignition, and it sent a pressure wave through the cable tunnel and blew out some stuffing we had in the wall where the cables came through, and some of our guys got showered with a bunch of debris there. No one was injured, but it did get our attention, and I'd say our celebration on that one was a little subdued. Now, one of the celebration parties in Huntsville, I was set up with a blind date with a pretty little blonde named Catherine. I think that's right. She worked with the data processing section up there, and 4 months later we were married. And a few months later we moved to Florida. That's the first contingent of the permanent group that were coming down to Florida. And so Brevard County in 1955, how many were here then? Wasn't anything like it is today. They were short on housing. I mean real short. And Dr. Grinner, Dr. Davison, they permitted us to live in the officers' quarters on Patrick. And we lived there for a couple of years, and that was pretty good. Now, another thing they weren't short on was mosquitoes. And you could count them like we do the deficit in the trillion. And another thing that got your attention was the water. It smelled like sulfur, tastes like sulfur, and it was. On Cocoa Beach, nothing but a few mom and pop motels, but there was a surf club. And there's one guy, a lot of us stayed at a little place where the Polaris Hotel used to be, called Winslow Beach, and we prided ourselves on being real smart. That guy wanted to sell us some of that beachfront property for $200 an acre. And we said, what do you think we are, a bunch of stupid? I guess it's $200 a foot now. Of course, I didn't have $200, so. Now, the work environment during that period, try to give you a little feel for that, it was 24/7. By that, I mean, ever what it required. Run a test, you keep going until you finish or give up, and we had no set, we didn't stop. 11 o'clock, it's time to go to lunch. We didn't do that. I mean, we didn't stop for coffee breaks. We drank a lot of coffee, but we didn't take any coffee break. Now, you can't write anything, a history of Cape Canaveral in that era without mentioning the Roach Coach. Chuck, I'm disappointed you didn't get it. That was our nutrition wagon, and it was staffed by two big ladies, Marilyn and Hortense. And man, they could make a sailor blush. And their coffee, you could float a spoon in it. But during that period, we didn't know any better, so we had minimum paperwork. We didn't know you're supposed to have a bunch of regulations and all that kind of crap. And we depended on individual responsibility. If you say it's ready to go, that's all I need. I don't need a piece of paper with 50 signatures on it that 49 of them don't know what it's all about. In our culture, we weren't politically educated. I mean, that wasn't in our vocabulary, and I'll give you a couple, 3 examples of that. Dr. Davis called a meeting one day in his conference room. This is over on the Cape. He says, what I'm saying here is top secret. What I say stays in this room, and it better not get out of this room. And so he started to talk, and one of the guys, good friend of mine and yours, he's deceased now, he used to be attend regular, but he's the guy that said what he thought. He said, Dr. Davis, you can't start the meeting now. I said, why not? She's still here. So? You know a woman can't keep a secret. that was Billy Fitzgerald, the only female in our organization that time. She's a successful real estate lady now up in Titusville. And one of the 4 people I know that are still alive from that team. And another, this in telling on myself now, I don't like to be so introspective here, but I was a pretty heavy cigar smoker back in that era, some of you know, and someone gave me a cigar lighter. It was pretty good size, about like a pack of cigarettes, and it had a little musical thing in it. It would play Dixie. And every morning I was the one that came in the blockhouse, opened it up, and put power on the missile, and we'd announce over the PA system to the guys out on the pad, missile's powered up and you're ready to go to work. And to get their attention first, I'd go to the mic, put the volume all the way up, and put my little Dixie on there. And Dixie went all over the pad and all over the cape. I'm not sure I could do that now. And another thing I did, innocently, as can I say that, that I'd probably get fired for today, my good friend Grady Williams. Some of you know Grady. He was head of instrumentation and telemetry in that time. He's passed away. But Grady called me and says, all right, you got any spaces over there? And our terminology in that time was space meant you had a vacancy and you were authorized to fill it. I said, yeah, Grady, we're looking for several good men. He said, well, I've got a guy over here interviewing. He's got a real good credentials, and personnel sent him over here, and I don't have any spaces. I don't know why they sent him, but I think you ought to talk to him. He's got real good credentials. And I felt something was sort of missing there. I said, Grady, anything else? He says, yeah, I guess I ought to tell you this. He's 52 years old. I said, Grady, you know we can't hire an old guy like that. And I was serious. And so he talked me in. I did interview him. I did hire him. I was right. He didn't fit in. And he was a good man, and we got him into another department where he flowered. Most of you know him, I told you. And many of you know just Rocco Patron. Rocco was assigned to Rocco was the captain that time in the military. And there ain't but one Rocco Patron. You know, he was a great football player at West Point, had a master's from MIT. And Rocco had, discipline was a virtue with Rocco. In my Marine background, that was a virtue with me. And we lived on the shoestring then. We didn't have any facilities at PAD. We had a shop truck. And we had some super good mechanics. They might butcher the King's English sometimes, but they were good. And they didn't have tools all scattered around there. And Rocco came through. I want this place cleaned up. I'm coming back. Better be clean. Came back. Everything was clean. They had some drawers. You know, you go in the aisle and drawers. Here's a drawer. Big wrenches. R-E-N-C-H-E-S. Another drawer. Little wrenches. R-E-N-C-H-E-S. And I learned something about Dr. Davis in that period too. He's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. One night in Countdown, I was sick as, Alabama phrase, I was sick as a horse. And I told Dr. Gruner, I said, I'm going out, our sport medically was the Army. And they had an old Army ambulance out there. I said, Doctor, I'm going out here and lay down this ambulance just for a little while. I think I'll be better. And a little while somebody said, Ike, is that you? I recognized Dr. Davis. I thought, man, I'm in deep yogurt now. He says, I want to get my driver and send you home. You shouldn't be out here, all these mosquitoes. And I argued with him. I said, Dr. Davis, I'll be all right. No, I want to send you home. I finally talked him into letting me stay because I really didn't want them to know that they could launch without me. The point is, he had compassion for his troops. He really did. Now, a little bit about the workforce. Now, this, I'm telling you the way it is. I'm not telling you the way it should be or whatever. It was all white. It was all male. There were no minorities. And that's just the way it was at that time. And they were all young. Now, youth has a, today that's much different. Most of the high, places now in KSC or anywhere in industry is, that's the problem that's going away. But the youth is, I think, a virtue in projects like we were experimental rocketry, because when you're young, you're not afraid of failure. You take a little kid, Tim's got a little kid, learn how to walk, room full of people, he falls, tumbles, and if he doesn't get hurt, we all laugh. Doesn't embarrass him, he gets up, goes again. So a young kid learns how to walk by falling. Now translate that to the human thing. People are like organizations. The older you get, and I've seen this in industry and the government, the older you get, the more baggage you pick up. The more baggage you pick up, it impedes your capability to progress. Because you get older, and I'll mention an example of this a little later, you think, well, golly, here's a big decision. If I'm wrong, I'm going to look bad. So what's the answer? A committee. And I'll show you later where that ain't the answer. Because you get like some of the things you hear on TV today. Big problem, but ain't nobody responsible. So we got to the moon by failures. We learned from our failures. We didn't learn from our successes. And it's kind of hard to say this, but the fire at Complex 34 back in January 1967, when we lost 3 astronauts, is an example of this. This was a disaster waited, the situation we had with the spacecraft at that time. And it occurred later, and I've heard the astronauts say this, that, out on the way to the moon or something, it would have been much more a devastating thing because you wouldn't have the hardware here to look at to determine what happened. And of course, out of that, we got a much safer spacecraft with all the changes they made. For example, open the door from out, not in. And in the 50s, the Cape was very active in launches. In fact, you go out to watch a launch, one thing you'd look around, where is something I can get under in case this thing comes apart? And that's true. Wear a hard hat. In fact, there was a project right next to our little bunker over there. It's called a snark. And then they all had all kinds of trouble with that. Sometimes it could get to the water, and we referred to it as a snark-infested beach there because all that debris washing up. We had another one there called the Navajo. We named it the Never Go because it never did go. And they had a missile graveyard out there where they'd collect all the, as a rocket would crash, we call them inner pad rockets. They'd gather up debris and pack it. And I said before, we were working on a shoestring. We'd go over there occasionally and go through the dump just to see what, get a cable here, a meter here, or whatever that we could salvage. Maybe a little biased, but I think in that period we had the most reliable record, but we did have our problems too. I know Redstone, I think it was 25, it went up beautifully a few hundred feet. Went horizontal, headed straight for central control. Now, central control is where they monitor if the vehicle's on track. If it doesn't stay between the lines, they blow it up. So coming toward them, rest assured, they pushed the button and it did blow it up. And we went back to Hangar D where our telemetry station and didn't have much data, just a few seconds. Remember, we poured over that and couldn't find anything. And Dr. Davis said, let's go home, come back early in the morning and see if we can find the problem. And so I went home. I couldn't sleep. All things running through my mind. It might be this or that. So I came back early and I came into the lobby of the VA, E&L building over there, guarding several people over there. And my good friend Johnny, he was a janitor there. He called me over and said, "It's like I want to talk to you." And so we went over. I said, "What is it, Johnny?" He says, "I know what happened to that missile last night." I said, "You do?" "Yes, sir." And I said, "Well, what is it?" Well, first he said, "I know you, and I know Dr. Davis, and you would never let a rocket do that." I said, "You're right, Johnny. We'd never let one do that." And he said it was them communists. Now, they were operating, out of Cuba, and they did have their boats out there, and we were always concerned they could get into our destruction. But I agreed with him that we'd never let one do that. And I got a picture of another one. Oh, here it is. This is a Jupiter, and the sky is up here. Can you see the rockets going up this way? Now, that was embarrassing because I don't know if you ever heard of Edward R. Murrah. He's the Cronkite of that era, and he was doing a documentary. He followed this rocket from the assembly in Huntsville down here, and we were going to put on our best show, showing what it's like. In fact, he was in the blockhouse looking out the window, and this thing went up over and fried a few rattlesnakes, and but we learned something out of that. In fact, I'd say every failure we did. And one rocket we developed in that 50s time frame was the Jupiter rocket. It was RBM, 1,500 mile range, and these rockets were deployed in after they were certified in Italy and in Turkey on the borders of Russia. And the Turkish and the Italian troops would go to Huntsville, go to school. They come down here on the Cape, and under our supervision, they'd launch a rocket. And these rockets, they came in later in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. When we were I'm telling you, we were on the brink of nuclear war. Kennedy and Khrushchev were, who's gonna blink. And they ended up, Khrushchev take his missiles out of Cuba. We would not invade Cuba. And it was never published at that time, and I don't know why, but part of that deal was dismantle our Jupiter missiles on the border of Turkey, which they did. Now, let me go back a little bit. In early 1952, a group of scientists across the world, several hundred of them, determined they want to have something called International Geophysical Year. And that was going to be a year, actually it was about 18 months. It was going to be in 1957, 1958, where they study the ocean, the Arctic, Antarctic, volcanoes, everything you can think of, and they wanted to study the upper atmosphere. And they asked the nations of the world, "Can you give us an artificial moon?" And the USSR said, "Yeah, we'll do it." And our President Eisenhower, said, "Yes, we will." Now, I was Eisenhower man, but somebody gave him some real bad advice. Now, get back to the committee. He formed a committee. First mistake. And they were asked to look at three configurations. One was a Vanguard, which would be a totally civilian hardware little thing and put up a satellite, about like a moon. But in all due respect, they had not ever chance to certify that. I mean, that was going to be the first launch. And the second was the Atlas, which is today a very reliable workhorse. But at that time, it had never flown, and it had real problems in their development phase, as many of you out here know. And then there's Jupiter C, which is the elongated redstone with some upper stages, JPL, and we had flown that in some preparations for certifying that other Jupiter in it. And we'd flown it 3,500 miles downstream, 600 mile altitude, and it was a reliable piece of hardware. All you had to do to put a satellite in orbit is put that fourth stage on there, and the fourth stage was just like the second was a cluster of 12. The third stage was a cluster of 3 of those rocks. The fourth would be a single. You put that on there, and you got something in orbit. And Von Braun and General Medeiros, he was Von Braun's boss. They'd been to Washington several times trying to talk those people, and we can put a satellite up there. No, not only no, but hell no. Told Von Braun, don't you ever put a fourth stage on that thing. And so the committee selected the Vanguard. Now, again, I'm saying they're putting pressure on those guys. They've never flown this, so the first one, well, let me go back a little bit, or go up a little bit. On October 4th, 1957, everything changed. You heard the beep, beep, beep of Sputnik. Here we are, greatest nation in the world, leader in technology, everything you can think of, culture, goodies and all that. And here's a backward communist country that's got a satellite, the first moon, artificial moon, and you don't think that was devastating, embarrassing, frustrating, anything you want to do. I remember a group of us out the pad when that came, and Jim White, one of our guys, turned on the receiver and picked up that beep beep, and that was devastating. And Khrushchev, the Soviet, got a lot of mileage out of that. They got accolades from every nation in the world. Look how great you are. And then they liked that, and a month later, on November 3rd, they sort of rubbed it in our nose a little more. They launched a heavier satellite with a female dog. And that really, was heartbreaking. And so in December 6th of that year, I'm talking about 57, we launched the Vanguard, and it had the problem. It exploded, left off, and that was a real bad day for America. And so at that time, then Washington told Von Braun and General Medeiros, okay, look, go launch your rocket. And a little irony on this thing, at the time, the first news of getting out about the orbit, Gordon Harrison, some of you know who I'm talking about here, up in Huntsville, the reporters came to him. We want to know what Von Braun and Medeiros held. And at that time, they were entertaining the Secretary of Defense in Ewan, Neil McElroy, out at the Officers Club at Redstone Arsenal. And I won't repeat what Medeiros said, but Von Braun got McElroy over there and gave him a real lecture on, what we can do, and I think that paid off. But I thought it a little timely that when they had been trying to sell this up there, and then the moment it's in orbit, it gets a chance to do that. Now, the reaction of Congress was almost a panic. What's happened here? What are we going to do? Concerned about security, about education, what happened to our science, math, and it was, so they really came into action. Out of the defense, they began to pour money into the educational. And so that was, in fact, on that, Kelly was downrange. I think he pushed the button to trigger the second stage. And it went into higher orbit. Kelly, I don't know if you did that or not, but it was some gripping because they're going to pick the signal up at Goldstone, and the time it was going to pick it up, it didn't appear. And it was a few minutes late. But on January 31st, 1958, we launched successfully the Explorer. Now, in 1961, April, Gagarin, the Russian cosmonaut, went into orbit. That was another blow to our pride and a concern that how secure are we? And 3 weeks later, on May the 5th, 1961, we launched Shepherd in the suborbital flight. And 3 weeks later, on May 25th, 1961, President Kennedy made this statement: we're going to the moon, we're going in this decade, we're going there, put them on safe and bring them back safe. Now, man, what I don't know how to describe our reaction to that, but prior to that, I guess you could equate us to speed like a little mom and pop operation. Next day we're Walmart, General Motors. I mean, you know, all the activity prior to that was over on the Cape. And after that, well, first let me say the first thing that occurred then, where's the moon port going to be? And the Air Force says, we'll buy some more land over there, and that'll be the moon port. Dr. Davis and guys looked at it and said, it ain't big enough. We need something larger. And Merritt Island was not, a given. The Kings Point, just north of Jacksonville, southern Georgia. And the Georgia people made a strong pitch. The moon port would be at Kings Point. And I think Brownsville, Texas was a candidate. Of course, Lyndon Johnson was from Texas, so you had to watch that. But anyway, I think Dr. Davis, as far as I know, was the sane head that, got to Kennedy by Merritt Island. That'd be Kennedy Space Center. Of course, it wasn't named Kennedy at that time. But if you think about it, from the time, May the 25th, 1961, 7.5 years later, Frank Borman was circling the moon on Apollo 8, reading from the book of Genesis from space. And I would say in today's atmosphere, you couldn't do that in 100 years, what we did from 61 to 68. We weren't organized. You had strong leaders. I got pictures, some of them here. Each center, Bob Gilruth at JSC, Werner von Braun, Dr. Davis, others. And of course they all had their idea. Let's go this way, and then had to have a strong NASA management, and that's lacking in a lot of places today as a strong leader. But fortunately we had one. Jim Webb, I think, was one of the best we ever had. I'm not talking about the senator from Virginia, this is the older guy. But he knew how to work the Congress, he knew how to work the executive office, he knew industry, he knew government, and he was the one who could get resources. And they called in Dr. George Mueller and General Phillips. And they drew up a plan and told each center, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, this is the way we're going. And they worked beautiful. I like Dr. Miller, let me say, and I'll mention this later, the workforce, again, I'll say at that time, and I'm just saying that's the culture, the way the nation was, there were no females in any management, they were secretaries and so. But Dr. Miller knew what the wives contributed to the program was this area was one of the booming, fastest growing in the country at that time, also one of the highest divorce rates. He came down periodically. He would hold a tea for the wives, and he would give them an overall view of the program. I know Catherine enjoyed that, and I think all the wives did. I thought that was a smart thing. And you know, they had to make some quick decisions. The moon concept, some of them, let's Earth orbit and go to the moon. No, go on the moon in orbit. And each one of them had valid arguments. They got them up in Huntsville in a 6-hour, close the door, 6-hour meeting, and they decided which way they'd go. Out of that, you know, you forget your arguments, you go, we'll all line up and do the same thing. Now you can spend a whole career studying the pipeline. And then the design of Complex 39. You know, nobody had ever designed the moon for it. What does it look like? And that's where Dr. Davis comes in. I can't say enough good words about he and Dr. Renner and those folks. But, you know, do you assemble this rocket on the launch pad? Do you assemble it off in the building? If you assemble it off, how do you get it to the pad? You know, there's things, well, we'll go there in a barge. We'll dig a canal. That was one option. We got rubber tire machine. And then Dr. Davis got a plane load, went up to a strip mine up in Kentucky where they had one of these huge machines, I guess as big as this room, you know, where the strip mine in coal and that crawler concept, you know, the treads. That's where that came from. And so it was just, I mean, you had to make decisions, had to go, and they had the people to do it. Now, one of the smart things Dr. Davis did back then, he called Rocco Petrone. I mentioned him earlier. He called Rocco back. I was glad to see that. I was a good friend of Rocco. Now, Rocco, I say he considered discipline a virtue. And that guy, I'll say this with all sincerity. If it hadn't been for Rocco Petrone, I'm not sure we'd have made the timing on the launch that we did. He set up firing room 4. You know, we had 4 firing rooms there, and 4 was not activated. We couldn't use it that early. All across the wall I had the perk charts. You know what I'm talking about, the waterfall. This block here, this block here, this block's got to be completed before this. And each block had a name, had somebody responsible if it wasn't producing. And you go with that guy someplace in the room, he had his little block with his breakdown. So he went on down, and so you could, every day you could see how we're doing as far as getting to the moon, how we're making it. And there's problems every day. I mean, we had to change the way we were prior to that. We were do it yourself. We didn't have a contractor. We were beginning to get into that, but we became more of an integration thing, you know. And Marshall was, when I say Marshall, I'm talking about Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. They were letting in contracts for the booster rockets, and Johnson Space Center in Houston was the command module and lunar module. And our contracts here had to tie in with that. And when it got to VAB, you know, that was a concept, bring the stages into the low bay, check them out, and then stack them in the high bay. And Marshall guys are great guys, but we always had some conflicts with them. They wanted their contract to say that they would own the stage through the low bay checkout, and then they give it to us at high bay. And Dr. Renner one, there ain't no way that's going to happen. So he was the principal that got that turned around. But we had, you know, the contracts, the way they're worded, we had a pretty good grip on it, because it, you know, like an award fee, you get a fee and then we could get some subjective, I don't know what you call it, but we grade them to see what kind of fee they got, and that's where we had the leverage, because all the managers here want to make a profit to keep his job, because his boss come down, how you doing? And so we had a pretty good grip on it. We had a good team. We had a tremendous team of contractors and NASA people. The biggest problem we had with NASA people, we had mechanics and technicians, electrical techs, and then the new concept, we didn't do any hands-on, so we had to convert them to quality people, quality control, which was a logical thing, but some of them couldn't adjust, didn't want to. In fact, one of those big guys came in to me, he was crying. He said, "You just don't trust me. You know I've been doing good work." I said, "Herb, it ain't that. This is, the way we got to operate." Now, I consider the Apollo the greatest human achievement in the history of man. We launched 9 rockets, no failures in the launch vehicle. And this hardware, remember this was built with 1960 hardware. We didn't have solid state. We had relays, step-in switches, tape recorders, moving parts, and all the time, anytime you got moving parts, your reliability goes down. We had a primitive computer that Tim Dietz there, he knows, that fill up this room pretty close. And it was RCA 110 computer. And one of the challenges we had on rockets back then that what the computer saw was all the red lines, and Frank knows what I'm talking about there. There's hundreds of values, that got to be. You can't be below this, you can't be above that. Pressure, temperature, RPMs, flow rate, whatever it is. And you got to have guys, several hundred in that big firing room with the authority, if things are out, to call cutoff. And then how long do you give them that authority? You get down to a second or two before liftoff, the more dangerous to, Frank, you know what that's one Norm Carlson with Gene Sestile. We know how we fought that thing, and it was amazing that we could get the countdowns off on time like we did, because the first countdown demonstration test we tried, it took us 17 days. 17 days to finally get the green lights to say, yeah, we could have launched if we were launching. And I might add, in the firing room is big firing room is the room between, and we call that the woodshed. If we had a problem, Dr. Davis Rocco take us into the woodshed where we had to explain what the problem was. And the group out there would see us go in the woodshed. They'd say, oh, something ain't right. And it was late in the Apollo program before we really broke through the barrier of the females and the minorities in the control room. Joanne, I guess Joanne Morgan's not here, but Joanne was the first one, as I recall, first female in there. And the first minority we had was a guy named Reamer Prince. And Reamer, he was a software guy. And at that time, we didn't have many good software guys. We couldn't even pronounce it. But the 110A computer I'm talking about, here's a motherboard of this, and there were several hundred of these in each computer. We had one computer in the control room, one in the mobile launcher. And they had a generic problem with these, and we sweated out for months how that thing was going. But one night to count down, we had a problem, and Dr. Davis wanted an explanation. I went over told him what I knew, and which wasn't much, and he wanted more. And so I called a guy called Frank Bryan. Frank was the head of our computer. He was in that back room. I said, Frank, you need to come up here and explain this problem to Dr. Davis. I've given it my best shot, and I can't go any further. He says, I want to send Raymer. I said, Frank, I think you need to come up here. He said, well, I think Raymer knows more about this than I do. I said, okay, if you say. So Raymer came up there, the blockhouse, the control room, upper step. Raymer came up, I introduced him to Dr. Davis. I said, Raymer, Dr. Davis wants to know things on this thing. So Raymer innocently, he started talking bits and bytes and gates and gigabytes. And I tell Dr. Davis, he's like, I was, he didn't have the phone. He finally says, how long is it going to take you to fix it? And Raymer gave him his best guess, and I hated it. He went back to Washington. I think he moved up the line, but really hate to see him go. He was really a quality guy. One big difference in the, well, let me tell one other thing here, and I've got to wind this thing up. It's getting dark out there. The biggest nightmare, I guess, I had in the whole space program, George Vianza called me one day, and many of you know George. He was head of the McDonnell Douglas and head of the S4B section. He says, I've got a problem, I want to talk to you. I said, go ahead, George. Because George and I talked all the time. That really wasn't uncommon. And he says, I want to talk to you over the phone. I want to come over and talk to you. I could tell in his voice, he was a little concerned. I said, okay, come on over, George. In the meantime, we had our NASA guys embedded in all these operations. And I called our guy on S4B, a guy named Bill Mahoney. I said, Bill, what are you working out there? He went over several little things, kind of like in the noise level. I said, is that all? Yeah. And Bill knew, many times I knew before George did what kind of problems he had, because our guys, were good at bringing those up the line. So George came over, he pulled some pictures out there, and the pictures were of the men's room in the S4B area of the low bay. And on the, the sinks, and then the mirrored wall, and on there, it's written, I'll fix the rocket. It'll never fly, ha, ha, ha. And and George said he had already called his corporate security people. And of course I knew immediately, well, I had to go up the line. I went to Dr. Greer, and to Rocco, and on up to Dr. Davis. He got Charlie Buckley in. George gave us all he had. He tried to find out who had been in the room, and that was leading us no place. And so we were in a real dilemma, because this was in the low bay, and checking it out there, getting ready to stack. And this is in the Apollo program, and there was no backup. You couldn't put that one aside and say, well, take this one, because it didn't exist. And so we, what in the world are we going to do here? We tried to keep it quiet, and I think we did a pretty good job of that. Well, we instituted some more inspections, as how you say it, not to alarm people, and then some retests. And our first decision had to make, are we going to stack this thing? Not knowing, because in the Apollo, or in fact all the shuttle, all of them today, have a very formal flight readiness review. And each one got to get up there and say, here's the problem I had, here's the way I fixed it. And heaven forbid if you ever have, we had one category, unexplained anomalies. You had one of those, you had to give rationale on why I say it's safe to fly. And I was the one that gave that readiness review for the launch vehicle. And of course, I didn't want to face that. And so that went on for several days, and you know, that just consumed us. And finally, George, I mean, he was a lady. He came in. It turned out that one of the guys, one of their best guys, had done that. He had had some design guys from Huntington Beach over here, and they went out with a 3 martini dinner, lunch, and came back and was going to have a little fun. And you know, they're going to shake up a few people, and then they come in and say, "Oh, I did that," and they saw it immediately. You know, got so elevated, the guy was frightened. But I guess that, I'm telling you, that was a nightmare during that period. And George said that was one of his best guys. They didn't fire him, they transferred him back to the West Coast. So, let's see, this page blank, I guess.
Is that the future program?
I would just humbly say that I feel we have a close bonding in this group. And as your email the other day said, we're blessed to have worked in the space program. And I just don't know what to say.
That's a tough act to follow. I has a book here he's going to give away. And it looks like a great one. And
Von Braun here, we're going to give it away. Chuck's going to do that, and we've got a special way we're going to derive it, but there's some good stories in there. And one, for example, Von Braun had a good sense of humor. And some lady from Alabama, this before we went to the moon, she wrote him, you know, one of these letters that I think a lot of them are circulating. If God wanted a man on the moon, he'd put him there. And she told him that and said, besides that, I'll bet you $1 you'll never make it. He wrote her back and said, this Bible didn't say anything about not having a man on the moon, but it did say something about gambling. There's some good material in there. You know, one of the smartest decisions that we made in that period I'm talking about, the end of World War II, was the Project Paperclip. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. That was the project that was headed by General Toftoy, and they brought Von Braun and about 120 of his guys to Fort Bliss, Texas, and of course Von Braun had faked some papers, and he filled a train of car after car of V2s and hardware, you know, anticipating he'd be in the American camp and not the Russians. And so that was a great decision. Bring those guys over here, put them at Fort Bliss, you know, near White Sands Proving Ground. And then we followed that great decision, one of the dumbest things we've ever done. For 5 years, we didn't give them anything meaningful, no project. In fact, Von Braun later wrote, we wasted 5 years. They did fly some V2s. In fact, one of them went over El Paso and landed in a cemetery in Mexico. But you know, that period of 45 to 50, after World War II, our country was busy. You know, we wanted washing machines, cars, Jim Walter's homes, silk hose, all that kind of stuff. And that's good. And we deserved it, but we also had enough money to do a space program, but we completely neglected it. And over in the USSR, they took a different approach. They didn't go for any of that stuff, and I can verify it because we've been over there a couple of times, and they were living in that period like a third world country. I mean, third world. Of course, they had a tremendous space in the military thing, but they got some of the Germans that von Braun's team, and they put them to work. And that period that we were idle, they developed the second time I made a little talk like this on the history of space. MC introduced me as working out at Kennedy Space Center for 40 years, and I really didn't know the guy, and I didn't know hardly anybody in the office, I mean in the audience. But when I got up there to the podium like this, I said, I've never worked a day in my life at Kennedy Space Center. That kind of shocked him, and I knew I had to recover from that. And the way you do it, if you like what you're doing, it ain't work. And I think a lot of you never worked at Kennedy Space Center, right? Right. Okay. I think the origin of our, can you hear me back there? Yes. Wayne, you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One time somebody said something, I can't hear you, and somebody else said, well, you ain't missing anything. But I think the origin of our rocket team that we started out with, it really goes back to the end of the war in Europe. You know, the V-2 rocket team, that World War II, we recognized a new dimension of warfare with the V-2. And this was headed up by a young scientist named Werner von Braun. And I have a real good book on generation of the V-2, and they were working on a rocket 500-mile range, which was way beyond anything we had at that time. So around 1950, the Korean War started, and our guys smartened up a little bit in Washington, you know, and said, hey, them Soviets, maybe they're up to something. So we better start looking at defending ourselves. So at that time, they moved von Braun and his team to Huntsville at Redstone Arsenal, and chartered to develop the Redstone rocket, which was a 150-mile plus range with carrying an atomic warhead. And Huntsville became a boom town. I mean, you know, many of you have been there when it was a little cotton town on the square, and it just exploded. And a lot of the influx in there were young engineers just out of school, most of them Auburn, like Dick Smith, and Alabama, Georgia Tech, Tennessee. I hope I'm not leaving out one of your good alma maters, but I'm sure they were represented. And so they went to work. And by summer of 1953, they had a rocket ready to come to Florida. So in the meantime, Dr. Kurt Davis, and he was one of von Braun's chief lieutenants, and Chuck earlier said, and then you're going to listen to me talk. Chuck, they wouldn't listen to me when I was out there. How about that? You listen to me now?
That's not the way I remember it.
Okay, it is good to be with you folks. Good to be any place when you're 90 years old. I turned big 90 last Thursday, and I'm trying to catch up with Milt Chambers. I'm right behind you, Milt. See if I got my countdown here. You know, we have a rich history in this country, 400 years. 2007 we celebrated 200 years, which was represented the founding of Jamestown, which is I think, recognized benchmark for American history. But so So the 400 years of rich history. And we got about 60 years of that as space history. Some rich space history. I'm not sure how much rich space we're going to experience here in the near future, but we have enjoyed a good ride. Last